The diplomatic sector of Xylus was designed to inspire awe, but it mostly inspired a headache. Polished chrome walkways reflected the station's sterile, artificial sunlight back into the eyes of new arrivals, and the air hummed with the oppressive silence of 1,000 different life support systems, all trying not to offend each other. As the ramp of the Terran vessel Spirit of Terra hissed open, Ambassador Marcus Vale breathed in the recycled air and offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Smells like bureaucracy," he murmured. Beside him, Sergeant Riley Knox stood motionless, a perfect statue in a crisp diplomatic security uniform. Her posture was relaxed but coiled, a spring waiting for a reason. Atmosphere consists of 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and a 1% concentration of arrogance, sir. Vale chuckled. "An astute analysis, Sergeant." They took 2 steps onto the gleaming welcome platform, and the universe screamed. Ear-splitting alarms blared to life, a cacophony of shrieks and wails from a dozen different alien cultures. Every defensive turret on the station, hundreds of them, swiveled with a hydraulic hiss and locked onto the Spirit of Terra. Their glowing muzzles promised instant, overwhelming annihilation. A voice, cold and synthesized, boomed through the sector. "Terran vessels, stand down. Your diplomatic immunity is revoked. Ambassador Marcus Vale is charged with high treason against the Galactic Council. All communications are severed. Prepare to be boarded." Vale didn't flinch. He simply rocked back on his heels, a faint, amused smirk playing on his lips. "Well, that's a warm welcome. Rather enthusiastic for a diplomatic visit, wouldn't you say, Sergeant?" Knox's hand, in a motion so smooth it was almost invisible, glided over her uniform's cuff. Her thumb brushed against a device no larger than a grain of rice, hidden in the seam. Her eyes, dark and unreadable, scanned the chaos, but they weren't seeing the flashing lights or the panicked scurrying of minor delegates. They were seeing data. "Enthusiastic, sir, or profoundly foolish," she replied, her voice a calm, flat counterpoint to the station's hysteria. "I detect a spike in localized energy signatures suggesting a premature activation, and their primary comms relay just went offline." Before Vale could respond, a procession approached, parting the sea of lesser beings. At its head were the architects of this little drama. Counselor Baxter, whose people resembled brittle, layered onions, radiated smug satisfaction from all 4 of his eye stalks. Beside him, the insectoid Counselor Zithkar clicked his serrated mandibles like restless castanets. The third, a gelatinous blob named Glee 7, sloshed with self-importance in its personal containment field. They were flanked by a heavily armed honor guard whose polished armor couldn't hide their nervous trigger fingers. "Ambassador Vale," Vexter boomed, his voice like rustling paper, "you are a viper in our midst. You have violated Clause 7 Gamma of the Proxima Accords. An act of war." Vale raised a curious eyebrow. "That Clause 7 Gamma? The one pertaining to the unauthorized weaponization of agricultural nematodes? A fascinating accusation. Do tell." Vexter's eye stalks quivered. He had clearly just invented the clause and didn't expect to be called on it. "Your games are over, human. You will face the council, now."
Your ancient traditions are hardly a compelling argument against inevitable progress, gentlemen.
The Obsidian Council chamber was less a room and more a cavern of polished black stone, designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. A single massive table dominated the center, and around it sat the glowering, slithering, and buzzing representatives of the galaxy's most powerful empires. Vale and Knox stood in the middle, bathed in a single spotlight, surrounded by guards. It was theater, and a rather poorly staged one at that. Vexter, Zithkar, and Glee 7 presented their evidence data logs that flickered with obvious signs of forgery, testimonies from witnesses who weren't present, and galactic maps where Terran trade routes were crudely painted over with skull and crossbones icons. "The proof is undeniable," Zithkar screeched, his wings buzzing with agitation. "We have a unanimous decision from this esteemed body. The penalty for such treason is death." Vale let the silence hang for a moment before he spoke, his voice calm and reasonable. He didn't look at the evidence. He looked at them. "Gentlemen, it appears your concept of unanimous is as fluid as your grasp of basic astrophysics. A fascinating cultural quirk, perhaps?" While Vale held their attention, drawing their fire with wit and condescension, Knox was at work. To any observer, she was the picture of a stoic bodyguard, her gaze fixed on the far wall. In reality, her mind was a whirlwind of activity. The slight sheen on her corneas was the reflection of a data slate only she could see, an overlay of the station's entire digital nervous system. Her focus wasn't on the wall, it was on the faint, invisible lines of code that crisscrossed the chamber. A slight, almost subconscious press of her thumb against her cufflink altered a single digit in the comms frequency of Guard Squad Delta, rerouting their command channel through a recursive loop that would eventually feed them their own orders. Another twitch, imperceptible to the naked eye, adjusted the acceptable temperature variance in the sanitation system of Vexter's private chambers by a fraction of a degree. A harmless change for now. She accessed the station's automated janitorial schedule, found Drone 734, and planted a simple logic trigger. If environmental sensors at Checkpoint Gamma detected protein concentrations consistent with a meat and cheese sandwich, it was to initiate a Level 3 biohazard protocol. Seeds, small, insignificant, and utterly untraceable. Do you deny these charges, Terran? Glee 7 gurgled, its gelatinous form pulsing with a righteous aquamarine light. Deny them? Vale let out a soft laugh. My dear amorphous friend, that would imply they are coherent enough to warrant a denial. Before we discuss my execution, perhaps you could first explain to the Council how my ship supposedly violated a trade embargo in the Kepler system while simultaneously being documented at a diplomatic function on Rigel Session. I find the physics of it simply fascinating. The counselor sputtered. Their trap, so carefully laid, was not proceeding as planned. They had expected fear, begging, or perhaps a futile outburst of anger. They had not expected to be given a pop quiz. They were in control. They held all the cards. The human was trapped, disarmed, and alone. They were, of course, profoundly wrong. The cage door had been open the entire time. They were the ones who had just walked into it.
You dare defy the Obsidian Council?
No, Counselor. I am correcting the record.
Huh.
A tense silence settled over the obsidian chamber. The human's calm refusal to panic was more unnerving than any outburst. Vexter, attempting to regain control, puffed up his onion-like torso. Your clever words are meaningless, Vale, he rasped. The facts remain. You are trapped. We have 52 elite security teams moving to secure this building. There is no escape. Knox, who had been perfectly still, chose that moment to speak. Her voice was devoid of inflection. 51. The word, quiet and absolute, cut through Vexter's bluster. He turned a single, irritated eye stalk toward her. What did you say, menial? A 51, Knox repeated patiently, as if explaining a simple subtraction problem to a struggling child. You have 51 active security teams. Zithkar clicked his mandibles in annoyance. Explain this pathetic attempt at bluffing. It's not a bluff, Knox stated. It's a report. 30 seconds ago, Guard Team Gamma 7 discovered an unauthorized nutrient packet of sandwich, I believe left on a sensor panel at Checkpoint Gamma. Its protein signature triggered a contamination alert. She paused for a beat. That alert was intercepted by janitorial drone 734, which, per protocol, has quarantined the entire checkpoint. She tilted her head slightly. Your elite guard is currently in a standoff with a very confused cleaning drone. A low murmur rippled through the assembled delegates. Vexter's eye stalks writhed. That's preposterous. A system fault. Indeed, Vale agreed cheerfully. You seem to be having a lot of those today. As if on cue, the grand chandelier hanging above the obsidian table flickered once, twice, then dimmed to half its normal luminosity. A cold draft swept through the chamber, causing Glee 7's gelatinous form to quiver. What is happening with the environmental controls? Zithkar demanded, directing his question to a nearby guard, who merely shrugged his armored shoulders in ignorance. From the depths of the station's ventilation system, a low, intermittent hum began, like a sad whale calling for a mate. The small, untraceable seeds Knox had planted were beginning to sprout. The minor frequency change she had assigned to Guard Squad Delta was causing them to receive ghost orders, sending them on a wild goose chase to the hydroponics bay. The fractional temperature change in Vexter's private lavatory had cascaded, triggering a feedback loop that was now slowly draining heat from the entire East Wing. The counselors felt it, this creeping, inexplicable chaos. But they couldn't comprehend its source. To them, it was just their own shoddy infrastructure failing them at a critical moment. It was an annoyance, a distraction. They still thought they were running the show. "Your tricks are meaningless," Vexter hissed, his voice rising. "Our control of this station is absolute." "You have nothing." "Nothing?" Vale echoed, a dangerous glint in his eye. "Sergeant, the counselor feels we have nothing. Perhaps a visual aid is in order." Knox's expression didn't change. "As you wish, sir." Knox's fingers didn't move. Her body remained perfectly still. But somewhere in the digital ether, her will became law. The massive obsidian screen behind the counselor's chairs, a screen that currently displayed the pompous, glaring seal of the Galactic Council, flickered. It went black for a single heart-stopping second, then lit up with an image that made a dozen different species gasp at once. It was a 3D real-time schematic of the entire diplomatic station. It was a god's eye view, impossibly detailed. Blue lines traced the patrol paths of security teams. Red cones marked the fields of view of every camera. Green dots highlighted every council member and their staff. It even displayed personal trivial data as if to mock them. A small tag above one of the green dots read, "Commander Gorlak, Security Chief. Current status, in personal office, 7 minutes past scheduled coffee break. Heart rate elevated." "This is classified," Zithkar whispered, his wings fluttering in disbelief. "It was classified," Knox corrected, her voice echoing slightly in the stunned silence. "Then you connected it to the same network that runs your cafeteria's menu display." But she wasn't finished. The display wasn't static. It was alive. As they watched in growing horror, the map began to change. A blue patrol line in Sector Beta suddenly blinked out, replaced by a text notification. "Squad Delta, communications rerouted." A dozen red camera cones flickered and turned gray. A door lock protocol in the West Wing switched from engaged to open. It wasn't a recording. It was a live demonstration. She wasn't showing them what she had done. She was showing them what she was doing right now. She was the ghost in their machine, the conductor of their symphony of failure. "This is impossible," Vexter whispered, his bluster finally draining away, leaving only the limp skin of a deflated onion. "The word you're looking for is Tuesday," Vale said pleasantly. "Now, Sergeant, I believe you had some other files of interest?" Knox's gaze drifted to Zithkar. On the screen, the grand schematic minimized, replaced by a single encrypted folder. With a thought, Knox decrypted it. The folder exploded into a web of illicit transactions, shipping manifests, and covert communications. It was a detailed record of Counselor Zithkar's illegal side business, selling council-grade energy weapons to the pirates of the Sigma cartel. His mandibles began to clatter violently, a sound like a box of dropped nails. His entire species communicated through subtle posture and pheromones, but the raw panic radiating from him was a universal language. Vale leaned forward, placing his folded hands on the table. His voice was soft, almost sympathetic. "Pirates, Zithkar? Tisk, tisk, think of this insurance premiums." The blood drained from Zithkar's chitinous face. He was ruined. Vale's gaze then moved slowly, deliberately, to the trembling form of Counselor Vexter. On the screen, Knox closed Zithkar's file. A new one labeled Vexter, Diplomatic Discretionary Fund, took its place. It remained locked. "For now," Vale smiled. "Shall we review your creative accounting next, Counselor? I'm told your grasp of financial logistics is every bit as impressive as your military strategy." Vexter's 4 eye stalks swiveled wildly, 2 fixing on Vale's mocking smile, the other 2 staring in horror at the locked folder on the screen, bearing his name. The rustling sound of his voice was now a dry, desperate crackle. This is a violation of everything." "And we seem to be making a habit of that today," Vale noted pleasantly. "Sergeant, I think the counselor is eager to see your presentation." With an invisible command from Knox, the folder labeled Vexter unlocked. It wasn't a spreadsheet of numbers, it was a visual flowchart. It showed funds being siphoned from the Council's Refugee Relief Fund, rerouted through a dozen shell corporations, and finally deposited into Vexter's private accounts, where they were used to purchase luxury moon-sized yachts and rare illegal nebula gems. The layers of his onion-like skin seemed to turn translucent with sweat. And just so no one feels left out. Knox's voice was a soft murmur, but it carried the weight of an executioner's axe. The screen shifted again. The last file, labeled Glee 7, opened to reveal not financial data, but images and chat logs. They documented Glee 7's secret membership in the cult of the primordial ooze, a forbidden sect that worshipped primitive, single-celled organisms as the one true form of life. For a high-ranking counselor who had built a career on promoting complex, multicellular supremacy, it was the highest form of hypocrisy and ridicule. Glee 7's entire body, which had been a confident aquamarine, turned a sickly, panicked shade of chartreuse. The three counselors were broken. Their careers were over. Their lives, as they knew them, were annihilated. In that moment of pure desperation, Vexter made his final, fatal mistake. He thought he still had one card left to play, brute force. He subtly touched a hidden panel on his chair, sending a single encrypted command to his personal guard channel. The command was simple. Knox didn't even blink. But the station itself responded. It began with a low, deep thump that wasn't so much heard as it was felt, a vibration that resonated up from the polished floor and into their bones. The entire obsidian chamber shuddered. A fine layer of black dust rained down from the ornate ceiling. What was that? Zithkar shrieked, his wings a useless blur of motion. A second, sharper crack echoed from the west wing, followed by the sound of shattering rock glass. Then a third, more muffled boom from somewhere deep below them. The emergency lights, which had been off, now flickered on, bathing the room in a hellish red glow. The counselors stared wildly around the chamber, their hubris finally replaced by the primal animal fear of a collapsing cage. Vale took a moment to inspect his fingernails with casual interest. Sounds like the building's settling. Knox cleared her throat delicately. An update, sirs, she announced to the terrified aliens. Your secondary communications center is now offline due to an unexpected power surge in its primary conduit. The East Wing Records Archive, the one containing the physical copies of your financial dealings, has just experienced a catastrophic structural failure. And all turbolift access to this sector is compromised. She paused. I'd advise taking the stairs, but they appear to be on fire. It was then the counselors understood. This wasn't a systems failure. This wasn't a coincidence. The explosions weren't random. They were surgical strikes. Precise, intentional. The human hadn't just taken over their data. She had taken over their reality. They were no longer in a chamber. They were in a weapon, and it was being aimed directly at them. The game of blackmail and humiliation was over. The physical deconstruction of their world had just begun. Panic is a universal solvent. It dissolves dignity, reason, and, in the case of the obsidian chamber, the structural integrity of the ceiling. As another tremor shook the building, Glee 7 sloshed frantically within its containment field. We're all going to die. It wailed, its voice a warbling series of bubbles. Unlikely, Knox stated calmly. My calculations suggest only a 17% chance of total structural collapse within the next hour. The odds are in your favor. A new alarm began to blare. This one was different, a high-pitched, insistent squeal, accompanied by the hiss of activated sprinklers in the corridors outside. A moment later, a truly foul stench, the smell of recycled nutrients and industrial cleaning solvents, began to waft under the chamber doors. Vexter's eye stalks widened in disgust. What is that abominable smell? Vale casually pulled a silk handkerchief from his breast pocket. Smells like Tuesday, he remarked, pressing the cloth to his nose. Knox consulted an imaginary data slate in her mind. Ah, she said, a hint of what might have been professional interest in her voice. It seems that in my haste to reroute emergency power, I may have accidentally cross-wired the station's fire suppression system with its primary waste management network. Through the armored glass of the chamber doors, they could see the hallways being sprayed not with water, but with a murky brown sludge. As if this assault on their senses wasn't enough, the artificial gravity flickered. For a terrifying second, everyone and everything in the room, counselors, guards, Vale, and Knox, lifted 3 inches off the floor. Loose data pads and debris hovered in the air before slamming back down with a resounding clatter. It was in this moment of utter chaos that Vexter turned to his last line of defense, the elite armed guards still standing in the chamber. "You fools!" he shrieked at them. "Do something! Shoot them!" The guards raised their weapons. And then the symphony of the absurd truly began. One of the guards, a hulking four-armed creature from a warrior race, suddenly lowered his plasma rifle, threw his head back, and began to sing. A beautiful, haunting opera aria soared through the chamber, utterly at odds with the surrounding mayhem. Another guard dropped his weapon with a clatter, his limbs locking into a rigid posture. He began to perform a series of sharp, robotic dance moves, a forgotten folk dance from his homeworld, reserved for fertility festivals. The guard captain, who had been aiming his pistol directly at Vale's head, simply blinked, lowered his arm, curled up on the floor, and began to snore loudly. The remaining guards looked at their suddenly theatrical comrades, then at the humans, then back at their comrades, their expressions a perfect portrait of bewildered terror. What have you done to them?" Zithkar stammered, his body trembling. "A minor software patch," Knox replied conversationally. "I took the liberty of introducing some creative subroutines into their neural discipline implants. Think of it as a team-building exercise. Nothing fosters camaraderie like spontaneous, choreographed artistic expression." Vale applauded softly. "A triumph, Sergeant. Their soprano has excellent range." The counselors stared, their minds unable to process the scene. They were trapped in a collapsing, foul-smelling building, being held hostage by two humans who had turned their elite soldiers into a cast for an avant-garde musical. They had lost. They had lost in every conceivable way. It was Vexter who finally snapped. His sanity, stretched thin by public humiliation, financial ruin, and now this surrealist nightmare, broke completely. "You think you've won?" he screamed, his voice raw with fury. The sound of the sleeping guard's snoring was his only accompaniment. "This station is nothing. A speck of dust. I have a fleet in orbit. The 11th Council Defense Wing. 10 battle cruisers under the direct command of Admiral Gorvash. I can give the order, and they will turn this entire station into incandescent plasma. Your victory will last as long as it takes for their cannons to charge." The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. For the first time, a flicker of something perhaps concern crossed Ambassador Vale's face. He looked at Knox. The sergeant seemed to be consulting an internal clock. She waited a beat, allowing the full weight of Vexter's final trump card to settle in the room. Then she spoke, her voice laced with something that sounded almost like polite regret. "A fleet, sir? Are you referring to the 11th Council Defense Wing that entered this system approximately 4 hours ago?" Vexter's eye stalks swelled with triumph. "Yes! The very same. They await my command." "My apologies," Knox said, her tone that of an assistant delivering unfortunate news. "But Admiral Gorvash is currently indisposed." "Indisposed? What foolishness is this?" "He's quite busy," Knox explained. "Approximately 7 minutes ago, his long-range sensors detected a massive ghost energy signature at the system's edge, a signature consistent with a Cathar pirate armada. A fleet of dreadnoughts, by the readings." Vexter paled. "The Cathar? They were wiped out decades ago." "A fascinating resurgence," Knox agreed. "The Admiral seemed to think so too. He was forced to divert Bond all power to forward shields and is currently proceeding at flank speed to intercept the threat. He won't be able to receive any new communications for at least 3 standard hours." To illustrate her point, Knox made a final grand gesture. The main screen, which had been displaying a screensaver of a dancing guard, blinked to life. It showed a tactical map of the solar system, a tight cluster of 10 green triangles. The Council fleet was dutifully speeding away from the station, chasing a single pulsing red icon on the far side of the system. A ghost, a phantom that she had painted onto their sensors from a billion kilometers away. Checkmate. There were no more tricks. No more guards. No more blackmail material. No more fleets. There was nothing left but 2 humans, standing calmly in the center of a chaos of their own design, and the resounding silence of total and complete surrender.
You have one cycle to comply. Refuse, and your worlds will be dust. The choice is yours.
The image of the Council's mighty fleet chasing a ghost hung on the screen, a monument to their utter and absolute defeat. In the hellish red light of the emergency systems, surrounded by the stench of their own reprocessed waste and the snores of their compromised guard captain, the three counselors finally understood the depth of their failure. They had nothing left. Ambassador Vale broke the silence. He walked calmly back to the obsidian table, brushed a thin layer of dust from the surface with his handkerchief, and sat down, folding his hands before him as if beginning a pleasant business luncheon. "Now then," he began, his voice cutting through the gloom, "since we've dispensed with the theatrics, let's discuss the terms of your surrender." Zithkar made a choked, gurgling sound. "Surrender. This is a diplomatic negotiation." "It was," Vale corrected gently. "It has since evolved. Let's call this a post-conflict resolution debriefing." He leaned back, his expression serene. "The terms are simple. First, the trade embargo against all Terran territories is to be lifted, permanently, effective immediately." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Second, the Galactic Council will issue full reparation payments to the colonies affected by your little economic experiment. The amount will be calculated by us and is non-negotiable." Vexter's eye stalks shot up. "Reparations? That's extortion. The Treasury protocols would never—" He was cut off by a deafening crack from the corridor directly outside the chamber door, followed by the screech of tortured metal. A large chunk of the ceiling, directly above the counselors' heads, detached and shattered on the table, showering them with debris. They shrieked and recoiled. Knox hadn't moved a muscle. Vale continued as if nothing had happened. "Third, the Galactic Council will issue a formal public apology to the Federation of Earth for this baseless aggression and flagrant violation of diplomatic protocol. The text will be provided by my office." "A public apology?" Glee 7 sloshed, its form turning a pale, horrified white. "Humiliation. Our governments would never stand for it." Knox's gaze drifted to the main screen. A new locked file appeared. It was labeled with Glee 7's name, followed by 2 words, Project Chimera Schematics. "The cult is merely embarrassing, Counselor," Knox said, her voice a chill down their spines. "The theft and attempted replication of forbidden xenomorphic weaponry is a capital offense, not just on your homeworld, but on every civilized planet in this council." She looked back at Glee 7. "Shall I continue?" Glee 7 went utterly still, the threat of mere humiliation replaced by the certainty of execution. "And fourth," Vale said, his voice hardening into steel, "Tranquility, the Terran Agency for Interstellar Security, will be granted permanent oversight of this council's security operations to ensure a misunderstanding of this nature never happens again." This was the final straw. It was a demand for total submission. Vexter, shaking with a mixture of terror and impotent rage, opened his mouth to protest one last time. Vale raised a hand, silencing him. He stood up and walked slowly around the table, his footsteps the only sound besides the snores and the low hum of failing systems. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "this isn't simply about an embargo anymore. It's about demonstrating why underestimating humanity is the galactic equivalent of trying to defuse a Nova bomb with a butter knife." He stopped and looked down at the 3 broken beings before him. "Do you truly wish to see what else Sergeant Knox has prepared for your Tuesday?" The question hung in the air, a final terrible promise. They looked at the chaos around them, the singing guards, the smoldering holes in the building, the sludge in the hallways. They looked at the damning evidence on the screen. They looked at the terrifying, placid face of Sergeant Knox, an architect of chaos who seemed to have barely begun her work. The fight drained out of them, replaced by a desperate, primal need for survival. "We agree," Vexter whispered, his voice cracking. The other 2 nodded frantically, their various appendages trembling. "We agree to all of it. Everything. Just make it stop." A wave of profound relief washed over the 3 counselors, so potent it was almost a physical force. They had survived. "Now please," Vexter begged, his voice a pathetic whisper, "turn it off. All of it." "Of course," Vale said with a magnanimous smile. "Sergeant?" Knox produced a small data pad from an inner pocket of her uniform. "All system-wide override commands are routed through a single command nexus on this console," she explained. gesturing to a small panel near the chamber's main door. Deactivation requires my input codes and the ambassador's biometric authorization. A standard two-person security protocol. All eyes stalked, multifaceted, and gelatinous fixed on Ambassador Vale with desperate, pleading intensity. Vale, however, seems to have lost interest in the proceedings. He was now examining his fingernails with the absorbed fascination of a master jeweler inspecting a rare gem. Ambassador, Zithkar ventured timidly. Vale looked up, as if noticing them for the first time. Oh, are we in a hurry? I was rather hoping for an encore from our talented friend over there. He nodded towards the guard, who had just stopped singing and was now looking around in a daze. The counselor stared, uncomprehending. The begging began. Please, Ambassador. Vexter pleaded, his body slumping forward onto the table. We have agreed to everything. We will honor it, I swear on my ancestors' sacred spawning grounds. We implore you. Glee 7 gurgled, its form quivering. The stench. I fear it may be permanent. Vale sighed, a theatrical sound of profound reluctance. Oh, very well. If you insist on rushing things. He strolled languidly over to the console where Knox was already waiting, her fingers poised over the datapad. One does hate to cut a party short. Knox's fingers moved in a blur, typing strings of code that would have taken a standard cryptographer a year to decipher. A holographic scanner glowed to life. Biometric scan required, the console chimed. Vale placed his hand on the scanner. A pleasant, harmonious chime echoed through the chamber. And then silence. The alarms died. The hellish red emergency lights shut off, replaced by the cool white glow of the chamber's normal illumination. The low hum of failing systems ceased. The snoring guard snorted and sat up, looking around in bleary-eyed confusion. The chaos stopped as abruptly and completely as it had begun. There now, Vale said brightly. All better. He turned towards the main door. Shall we? The counselors didn't move. They simply stared, their minds too shattered to process the sudden return to normalcy. As Vale and Knox reached the exit, Zithkar found his voice. Wait! Your guards, the ones in the hallways, they will shoot on sight. Knox paused and opened a standard-issue diplomatic briefcase she had retrieved from the floor. The interior, however, was anything but standard. From a foam-lined compartment, she lifted a small, silver orb that hummed with latent energy. A minor contingency, she said. They stepped out into the main corridor. Ahead of them, a dozen soldiers from various squads had begun to regroup, their initial confusion hardening back into hostility as they saw the two humans emerge. Knox thumbed a control on the silver orb. It didn't emit a sound that could be heard. It emitted a picture. A wave of psychosonic and visual distortion washed over the corridor. To Vale and Knox, nothing changed. To the guards, the world warped. The two humans vanished, replaced by the shimmering, 20-foot-tall silhouette of a crate dragon, a legendary apex predator from the nightmares of 100 worlds. A chittering psychic shriek that bypassed the ears and drilled straight into the brainstem echoed in their minds. The soldiers' training, their discipline, their courage, all of it evaporated in an instant. They screamed, they dropped their weapons. They turned and fled in pure instinctual terror, trampling over each other to get away from the monster that wasn't there. Vale and Knox proceeded down the corridor at a leisurely pace. They walked through the wreckage of their own making, the scorch marks on the walls, the sludge-covered floors, the abandoned weapons. They passed whimpering guards huddled in corners, their minds still reeling from the phantom beast. It was a victory lap through the ruins of their enemy's arrogance. They reached the main entrance of the diplomatic sector and stepped outside. The perpetually twilight sky of Xylos seemed almost peaceful now. Behind them, the smoking, stinking, and utterly defeated council building stood as a testament to a very successful, if unconventional, negotiation. From the bridge of the Spirit of Terra, the planet Xylosus was a serene swirl of blue and white against the black velvet of space. It looked peaceful. Only the faintest wisp of smoke, visible even from orbit, hinted at the chaos that had transpired in the diplomatic sector. Ambassador Vale sat at his command console, a steaming mug of Terran coffee in his hand. With his free hand, he typed out his final mission report. The message was, like the man himself, concise and brutally efficient. To Tranquility Command, Earth, from Ambassador M. Vale, GCS Spirit of Terra. Subject, resolution of Xylos trade dispute. Mission objectives achieved ahead of schedule. Political objectives exceeded. A valuable lesson in humility has been delivered to the Galactic Council. All in a day's work. Vale ends. He hit send with a quiet click of satisfaction and took a long sip of his coffee. Across the bridge, Sergeant Knox was not resting. She stood before a holographic workstation, her eyes scanning terabytes of data scrolling past at an impossible speed. It was the complete, unfiltered digital soul of the Galactic Council's diplomatic network, a prize far more valuable than any trade agreement. She was a shark in an ocean of secrets. "Find anything interesting in their personnel files, Sergeant?" Vale asked, a note of amusement in his voice. "Any more embarrassing cult memberships?" "Their security protocols are a fascinating study in institutional incompetence, sir," Knox replied without looking up. "But their secrets go deeper than bad passwords." She manipulated the holographic display, and a complex schematic filled the air between them. It was a weapon, something biomechanical and horrifying, a fusion of technologies that should never have been brought together. "Sir," she said, her voice as flat as ever, "during the data extraction, I also managed to secure the complete schematics for something called Project Chimera." Vale leaned forward slightly, his relaxed posture gone. His eyes narrowed as he took in the impossible design. Knox added, "It seems the Council has been very busy." A long silence settled on the bridge, broken only by the low hum of the ship's engines. Vale stared at the monstrous weapon floating in the air, then at his impossibly capable sergeant. He sighed, the amusement returning to his eyes, tinged with a familiar weariness. He leaned back in his chair and took another sip of coffee. "Of course you have, Sergeant," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Wouldn't be a Tuesday without a little extra complication, would it?" The spirit of Terra adjusted its course, aimed for the infinite, star-dusted blackness, and vanished in a flash of faster-than-light travel. Behind them, a lesson had been delivered in fire and humiliation. Ahead, a far more dangerous secret was waiting to be unraveled. The galaxy, as always, was full of problems, and humanity, as always, was ready for them.